Welcome to our Think Big Series brought to you by PSG. My name is Johannes Teran and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of PSG Distribution. As a leading financial services group, PSG has an extensive national footprint both in South Africa as well as Namibia. We've been in operation since 1998 and we pride ourselves on providing our clients with a bigger picture approach when it comes to their finances, from an asset and wealth management perspective to short-term insurance. We are an advice-led firm backed by some of the best financial advisors in the country. The Think Big Series is a collection of dialogues with high-value speakers hosted by award-winning journalist Bruce Whitfield. Each topic addresses burning issues which are causing South Africans anxiety in these uncertain times. The series aims to empower our audiences with factual evidence to help them formulate their own views, but also manage the expectations on how various aspects of the current situation could unfold. Follow us via our social media campaign, #ThinkBigPSG, and remember, this series is free, shareable, and open to anyone interested. In today's webinar, Bruce will be talking to André de Ruyter. André was appointed as CEO of Nampak in 2014, and he held that position till January this year when he accepted the position as Group Chief Executive at Eskom. Over a 30-year career, André has worked both locally as well as internationally in various portfolios in the energy space. He has significant experience in managing coal, which we've all come to know is very important in the production of electricity, as well as in the oil, chemical, and gas businesses. André was a member of the Sasol Group Executive Committee from 2009 till 2014, and he also spent some time in China as the president of China Ventures and in Germany as a business turnaround specialist, as well as in a managerial capacity. A secure energy supply remains key to South Africa's economic future. Can Eskom deliver on this challenge? We look forward to the conversation as André also shares his views. Over to you, Bruce.
Johannes, thank you very much indeed. Oh my goodness me, if we get that answer today, I'll be very, very pleased indeed. André de Ruyter, it's hard to believe that it's less than a year since you took over the hot seat at Eskom. It feels like you've been there forever. I'm sure it possibly feels even longer for you.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way, Bruce, and no doubt those people who observe my hair color will have observed that I'm now completely grey.
I mean, André, you could have had any job that you wanted. There are probably 30 CEO changes on the JSE every year, top 150 companies. You could have almost had your pick. You'd gone from Sasol to Nampak with a few little moves in between, but you could have taken any other job, yet you chose the impossible one. Why?
Bruce, yes, thanks. I was asked to take on the Eskom job. It wasn't a job that I particularly applied for. But when I was asked to go to the interview, obviously before you go to the interview, you do some introspection. You say, well, what if I actually do get this job? Will I accept it? Because to go through the process and then decline gracefully is not a good style and good form. So I thought to myself that this was an opportunity for me to apply some 30 years of knowledge that I've picked up in the energy and management space. I happen to know a bit about coal. I happen to know a bit about natural gas. I'm familiar with running large, complex operations. And it was a fantastic opportunity for me to see if I could make a contribution. And I think making a contribution is really important for us as South Africans, whatever our race or gender or hue, because I think we increasingly are starting to see disengagement, and people are saying, you know, let me rather stand around the braai and complain, and instead of trying to contribute to fixing the country. And a fix is definitely what we need, not only at Eskom, but across all fronts.
Mark Barnes felt the same. I mean, Mark Barnes would write his columns in Business Day and he would be complaining. And he woke up one day and said, look, I'm putting up my hand. I will do my national duty. And he did a huge amount of really positive work in terms of sorting out the finances of the post office, which have subsequently gone to pot once again, because eventually he realized he couldn't have an impact. His strategy was not government strategy. He wanted to incorporate Postbank into the post office and he couldn't implement his strategy. So out of sheer frustration, I guess, and respect for the process, he went, well, if you don't need me, I'll go and spend more time in Komiki. Are you not afraid of that happening?
It's a challenging job, no doubt about it. And one of the reasons that it's challenging is because of the number of stakeholders that you've got to keep happy. We've got everybody from cabinet ministers to members of parliament to dissatisfied customers to members of industry to the Minerals Council, and they all need to feel that their particular agenda is the most important one for Eskom. And that balancing act is quite tricky and it's quite difficult, but I think we are making progress by being very transparent and very honest about the challenges that we face. We are trying to keep people informed. We are publishing significantly more information on our website than we've ever done before. So you will have noticed that some of the energy critics that have surmised information, they've gone pretty quiet now that the data is out there and it's available and it's transparent. And that is a pattern that we would like to continue to do, because we believe that if we put our stance out there and we subject ourselves to contributions and to criticism, then it's objective. There's no room for conspiracy theories, although Twitter still manages to delve into those dark spaces sometimes. But all in all, I think we are doing reasonably well in managing and balancing all of those stakeholder interests.
It's not just Twitter, though. I mean, Independent Online recently ran stories about your chief operating officer, Mr. Oberholzer, and you had to carry out an investigation, go through the process to prove that the reports were inaccurate. You were then accused of being found to be complicit in lying to the board in a report by Advocate Wim Trengove. And that was then forced you to publish that report and put it out into the public domain. That was a complete and utter fiction. I mean, how do you focus on a day job when there are constantly barrages of blatant mistruths, even campaigns to try and destabilize and unseat you?
Yeah, Bruce, it's very true that it is a campaign, and it's clearly an orchestrated and well-managed campaign. We've got people looking at social media for us. And it was clear that the campaign, the so-called hashtag De Ruyter must fall, was coordinated by 5 individuals. We know who they are and where they're based. We then confronted them and said, you know, are you really sure you want to continue to publish these untruths? And they went very quiet. And that particular hashtag hasn't featured since. So it is very time consuming and it's very draining because it's negative energy. You're not doing anything to fix Eskom. You are defending, and you have to continuously repeat over and over the same message. No, he didn't steal. No, he didn't misappropriate 140 billion rands. I mean, that was the allegation made against Jan Oberholzer, which is just a ludicrous number. Anybody who stole 140 billion would probably be living in Dubai by now. And I think, therefore, that, yes, it's draining, but we've got to get over this resistance, because I think we are now standing on the conduit funneling money out of Eskom. And that's not designed to make us popular. And we are going to get some resistance.
Here's the issue. I mean, you are the 11th CEO in about 10 years. They've been, in that 10 years, there were 6 boards. I mean, there was just been the most untold political interference. You talk to somebody like Ruel Khoza, who was chairman of Eskom for a decade, and he says, you know, during his decade, there was plenty of electricity, it was available at a cheap price, and things fell apart when he and his team moved on. The era of Mick Davis, for example, who recently was very supportive of you at the Joburg Mining Indaba. There's been a decade of catastrophic mismanagement and plunder of Eskom.
Yeah, No, that's very true. And fixing that takes an inordinate amount of time and energy. You know, if you neglect maintenance for a year, based on my previous experience, where at one of my previous employers, we neglected the maintenance of a boiler for a year. It took us 8 years to recover from that 1 year of neglect. Now you can imagine if you've got 10 years of neglect across 80 odd boilers that comprise the state of our generation system. And you will understand that catching up is not going to be a quick fix. And in fact, catching up is not the ultimate answer. The ultimate answer is that in addition to fixing, we need more generation capacity.
And that has come in a form recently. And again, you've got a complex relationship with multiple government departments, but there are two primary ones. There's Department of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, that's where you report directly into, but you've also got this relationship with Gwede Mantashe, who is the energy minister. It's kind of a weird dual sort of not reporting structure, but a relationship issue. And he is responsible for declaring whether or not you can acquire independent power produced power, the IPPs. And he has recently made it possible for you to procure, what was it, about 12 gigawatts, what's that, 12,000 megawatts, which sounds very impressive. But actually, I'm not too sure that it does too much in the way of actually fixing the problem.
Yeah, if you analyze what that ministerial determination does, it creates a bit of a concern that while this is definitely a move in the right direction and as such should be welcomed, and we did welcome it. We said this is fantastic. Let's get this additional megawatt onto the grid as soon as we can. There's about 1,500 megawatt of new coal. Now, even if you could get the money, you could go and borrow the money in order to build a new coal plant, and that's going to take you the better part of a decade. You then have to comply with environmental emissions. So this is going to be a very tough ask to build 1,500 megawatts of additional new coal. Then you look at the availability factor of renewable energy, and there's about 6,000 megawatts of renewable energy in this ministerial determination, and you multiply that by the availability factor, because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. And before you've really started, of the 12 odd gigawatt that we've got, about half is not going to be available within the next decade. And this comes at the same time as we are decommissioning between 8 and 12 gigawatts of coal-fired electricity, because our plants have simply become too old to continue to operate. And therefore we are advocating, we are saying this is a fantastic first move, but give us more capacity, because the country needs it.
Are you not therefore putting yourselves out of business in the long term? Because Eskom has got, of course, two new big coal-fired power stations in Mudupi and Kusile, neither of which is working optimally because of massive build issues over time and corruption issues related to both of those projects. But now you're saying we can outsource the generation of power and we can buy that in. You're not talking about creating new generating capacity by Eskom. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, we would love to participate in the creation of new generation capacity. There are some opportunities for us to participate by means of repurposing all coal-fired power stations that we can convert to natural gas, or where we can put in wind or solar, and where we can contribute the infrastructure that exists at those old power stations as equity in kind to a public-private partnership. So that's our thinking, how we can leverage a position in generation going forward without having to fork out cash, because cash is something that we clearly don't have, and we just don't have the balance sheet. Now, I think the old style Eskom thinking was that because we are the only game in town when it comes to generation, let's resist any other generation coming online as much as possible. But we can't sit here and in the national interest make that statement, because we know that there is a train smash happening right now, and we've got to prevent that, and we've got to put measures in place to enable the country to procure additional generation capacity. And therefore, we are restructuring Eskom. We are separating into a new wholly owned subsidiary, but independently governed, the transmission business, and that will enable us to buy electricity on an independent basis, which will give private investors in power generation the comfort that their bids will be fairly adjudicated. So we are really trying to enable new private investment in generation capacity.
Because what you do have, and give or take 10 or 20 billion rand, is a 500 billion rand debt burden. I mean, this most extraordinary debt, which is built up over the last decade or so under various management teams and various boards, it was almost like a Zimbabwe-style printing press. There was no thought of the consequences of continuing to run Eskom at a loss and continuing to allow the sort of contracts that were allowed, whether it was Tegeta or the multitude of crimes that were committed in the name of Eskom. How on earth do you deal with something that big?
Bruce, there's no simple answer and there's no single answer to resolving the debt problem. And it is the most challenging, intractable challenge that we've got. The fact that we are having to borrow money to pay interest on the debt that we've got tells you how unsustainable the situation is that we find ourselves in. We're therefore very grateful for the equity support that government has injected into Eskom. That makes a meaningful difference, apart from the fact that NERSA then decided to classify that equity injection as revenue. And that put us in a position where, unfortunately, we then were deprived not only of the equity, but also we were deprived of the appropriate increase in tariff, which would have helped to address our income statement. So that's why we took NERSA to court, by the way, which was an important step for us to take in the correct decision. So we need the continued equity injections. We need higher electricity tariffs. And I understand this is not good news. People look.
There are people looking at the screen right now. They're saying to you, Director, who the hell do you think you are? We already pay, 8 times more than we did 10 years ago for electricity, whatever the number is, an extraordinary amount more. And you want to keep, you can't even keep the lights on, and you want to charge us more. No. Hold on a second. Let me phone a solar power installer and pay the 300,000 bucks and take myself off the grid. That's the reality.
Reliable electricity is a lot cheaper than unreliable electricity. And that's really the nub of the matter. For us to have cost-reflective tariffs is critically important. And we're not asking for a subsidy of inefficient costs. So we're prepared to take the haircut on our headcount. We're prepared to take the adjustments on our own inefficiencies and how we spend money. And we acknowledge those. But after that, there is clearly a significant gap between where the NERSA determined tariff is and where NERSA's own methodology says that we should come out. And that gap is critical for us to achieve some semblance of financial independence. So when we talk about cost-reflective tariffs, even after reaching that about R1.30 per kilowatt hour, we are at a point where it is very clear that we can enable continued investment and also continued maintenance of our existing assets at that level of tariff. And we've done extensive benchmarking. Even at R1.30 per kilowatt hour, our electricity will be amongst the cheapest in the world. And again, people look at their electricity accounts and they say, no, this can't be right. And the problem is that municipalities in South Africa use electricity as a significant money spinner for their own revenue collection. And the margins that they add on to the electricity bills are sometimes as high as 80%.
Yeah.
Now, it's very difficult for us to control that. In fact, it's entirely outside of our control. It is something that needs to be regulated and controlled by NERSA. But the perceived electricity cost that people see on their monthly accounts is indeed quite high, but that's not Eskom's fault. That is what you need to take up with your local councillor.
That is something that I think a lot of people will do, but you do have a very big cost base. You've got a lot of people. One of the questions, and lots of people sent in questions before this conversation because they've got their pain points that they'd like to address. And I'd like you first to dispel this as fact or fiction. Since it is common knowledge that Eskom is 70% plus overstaffed, that seems like a big number. I've seen big numbers, but that is the biggest I've ever seen. I think the relative accepted number is you've probably got 30, maybe 40% more people than you actually need. That 70% number, can we debunk that quickly?
Yeah, no, that's a wild one. I've never heard that before. The appropriate staffing level is between 36 and 38,000 people. So we started off at the end of last year with about 46,000 people. We're currently sitting at 44,000 people, and we are on a very clear glide path down to that 36,000 number by around about 2023. Those are our plans, and we want to do so without resorting to Section 189s. That's the mandate that we've got from our shareholder. And through a combination of natural attrition, a recruitment freeze, as well as voluntary severance packages, we believe that we've got the plans to manage that down.
And then there are people and there are people, of course. It's about having the right people to do the right jobs to the right level. What about the skills issue? Because there are other questions. Here's another question here saying, how are you addressing the skills shortage, the lost experience, employee burnout, incompetence in management? And the question says low moral. We know that there have been low morals at Eskom for some time, but low morale, I think, is the question.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we probably suffer a bit from both. I think that is a challenge. But let me first say that I've been very pleasantly surprised at the caliber of people that I've met in Eskom. We've got some seriously smart, competent, and capable people of all ages and of all races and of all genders across the board. And that gives me a lot of hope that with the appropriate leadership and management, if we can unlock the energy inherent in those people, then we will have a fighting chance to turn the system around. Do we have our share of incompetent people? Do we have our share of dead wood? Do we have our share of corrupt people of low morale and morals? Probably. And I can say that with a high degree of certainty. But can we fix Eskom with the staff complement we've got? I think we can. I think we've got the foundation there if we put the right systems in place. Because remember, what happened at Eskom was more of a leadership failure than it was a failure of people.
And that's happened across many sectors, parts of the public sector, I mean, across many, many levels. The idea here that you intervened, and it was such a smart intervention as well, where you went to, was it 3 power stations, and you basically read the riot act. You called everybody into a room about 3 or 4 months ago, and you said to them, guys, the places are a tip, you're not managing them properly, you've got X number of weeks, fix them, or I'm coming to chuck you out. Most people jumped on board and did the job. There were a handful, however, who didn't, and you replaced them. You did an old-fashioned management thing, I think. Just take me through that process.
Yeah, so it came to my attention just by walking the floor that the state of housekeeping in Eskom, particularly in our power stations, was not nearly up to standard. And some power stations were very good, others were absolutely appalling. I then took photographs, and I had photographs taken of the evidence. I called all of the power station managers together in a room. I showed them the presentation, and I said, this is what we are seeing in your power stations. It's not on. It's not acceptable. Fix it, because this is the job of management. That is what you are supposed to fix. And for those viewers who may think that housekeeping seems like a very trite thing to focus on, it is immensely important in maintaining discipline and focus, and also safety and high operational standards. So that's the start. If you have a dirty, ill-maintained plant, you cannot possibly have good outputs. So hence the focus on housekeeping.
But that's your Sasol experience coming through, isn't it? I mean, Sasol was pedantic at the time, certainly that you were there. Sasol was an absolute stickler for that sort of micromanagement.
Exactly. And boots on the floor, there's just no substitute for that. You've got to walk the floor and you've got to see for yourself. Inevitably, there's a tendency to present the glossiest picture possible to senior management. And if you don't go and see for yourself, it's not going to be the truth. So, you know, coming back to the story, I then drove out to the two power stations in question, and I said, well, here's your letter. You are henceforth suspended. And it's a tough thing to do, and it created waves throughout the organization. But we really need to get serious about running a professional production outfit. And that job starts with the power station manager, and they've got to step up and meet that challenge.
Just how high risk was that? Because quite often power station managers, we're told over the last couple of years, of, you know, just try to be populist and popular, nice, and everybody wants to get on, and everybody wants positive assessments and little tick box exercises, and you're there by the grace of the trade unions who you might suck up to for Friday evening drinks or whatever the case might be, because nobody really wants to ruffle, you know, sort of rock the boat too much. How risky was it?
No, I don't think it was risky at all, because it was the right thing to do. I had the support of the board as well as the minister. So, you know, you spoke about political interference earlier. This is a very good example of political support that enables me to do my job better than I would have otherwise been able to do. I think in South Africa and also in Eskom, we have a tendency towards the country club management style. Keep everybody happy, keep everybody in a state where they feel that they are members of this club, that they belong. And by the way, if you can recruit more members to the club, then you're a good manager. So turning that around and saying, no, hang on, we've got a tough job to do. It's a difficult job, and I expect you to live up to that standard. That's the message that we're putting out there, and I think we are making progress. Of course, if you can't change the people, you have to change the people.
I mean, it's coincidental maybe that since you took those very strong actions, there's been considerably less load shedding. Is that just a timing issue, just a bit of luck, or is it actually a direct consequence?
You know, one of my favorite sayings is by a famous English author, Samuel Johnson, and he said, nothing concentrates the mind like the prospect of a hanging in a fortnight. And sometimes you do need that hanging to just concentrate the minds a bit.
And are minds more concentrated now?
I think definitely so.
Focus, meneer, focus. Derek Cooper, really, I mean, talk about rocking the boat. When we first ran out of electricity in 2008, Derek Cooper at a big business gathering said, put up his hand, he said, you know what, as chairman of Standard Bank and as somebody who's interested in business in South Africa, why don't we just stop selling underpriced or undercost electricity to the smelters? Shut down the smelters in Richards Bay and we solve the electricity problem. All hell broke loose. Are we still stuck with those sorts of contracts where we are selling cheap electricity at the cost to South African citizens?
You remember, Bruce, that many years ago when South Africa had a surplus of electricity, and in fact, since the foundation of Eskom some 93 years ago, the strategy has been to use cheap electricity as a tool of industrial competitiveness. And because of a number of reasons, our coal is no longer cheap, our labor is no longer cheap, we are forced to meet ever higher environmental standards. Electricity has become more expensive than it used to be. So that's the first point to make. So we are stuck with some of those legacy contracts. But we must also bear in mind that the South 32 smelter in Richards Bay plays an incredibly important role in giving stability to our nationwide transmission system. In the event of a national blackout, the way that the sequence will work is that you will start up the system again by using the pumped storage at Drakensberg. The first customer that you'll bring back online will be South 32, and that's how you start to re-energize the system. So in the absence of that strategic asset, the country will be hugely exposed. So there is a very symbiotic relationship between Eskom and its large customers. They are very important to us, not only as customers to whom we sell, but also as contributors to the overall stability of the system.
But it also sends a very important signal, and a critical signal to investors, all of whom I'm sure I was in Davos earlier this year, and the head of Heineken, the financial director of Heineken, was looking and talking to Tito Mboweni in a very small closed session. There weren't too many investors. I'm just saying, your power cuts really hurt us. And it was such an emotional response to such a critical business issue. And it's deep pain. If you can't trust the electricity grid, well, then you can't run your business. If you can't run your business, you're not going to invest anymore. And that's why this is important.
Absolutely spot on. And that is why, unfortunately, we have to pay more for electricity in order to make it more reliable. And at the same time, we've got to get more capacity onto the grid urgently.
What is your view on the privatization of Eskom? Ask somebody.
So let's do the DCF of generation in Eskom. You've got power stations that earn a regulated return that doesn't cover their costs. You've got assets that are, particularly in the case of Medupi and Kusile, very highly priced, so they cost a lot of money to build. And if you exclude Medupi and Kusile, the average age of our generation fleet is about 39 years, and they've got 11 years left to run before they have to retire, on average. Now, if you start to do the DCF on that basis, and you add in the costs of environmental rehabilitation that you have to incur, I think that the DCF of the Eskom fleet is probably negative. And I don't think we'd get many bidders to volunteer to come and buy power stations, unless we want to give them away for free, which I don't believe is the right way to go forward.
So it's a no then, is the short answer, but you would like to be able to procure more independent power. So you're not averse to the idea of more power producers coming into the market, even perhaps nuclear producers. Would you be open to that idea? Koeberg seems to be fairly reliable. It's a graceful old lady who keeps ticking over at a very small output, but certainly has been very reliable. Would you be open to more nuclear?
Koeberg's a great asset. We are in the process of applying to extend its life by a further 20 years. We've just bought the first of 6 new steam generators that sit around the reactor and generate the steam to drive the turbines. And it's a great asset to have because they stay online, delivering 912 megawatts 24/7 for 430 days at a time, which is just what we want. However, if you start to look at the capital cost of building new nuclear and you look at the time associated with it, it'll take you 12 to 15 years to bring new nuclear online, and it will probably cost you about R1.80 per kilowatt hour. So when you compare that to new wind at about 70 cents per kilowatt hour, and you look at photovoltaic electricity about 60 cents per kilowatt hour, and the fact that you can bring wind and solar online in about 18 to 24 months, the decision kind of makes itself, even if you ignore any environmental considerations.
And then it comes down to the question of storage and whether Elon Musk can build batteries the size of the Karoo in order to store the stuff once you've generated it, of course. I mean, that's the other big problem with the renewables. How do we get around that?
Yes, you spot on, and that is why we need to rethink our electricity system. How do we capture electricity when the resource is available, when the wind blows and the sun shines, and how do we release it when the economy demands it? When it's 7 o'clock on a July winter's evening and you want to turn on your heater, will the electricity be there for you to do so? And you are spot on. We need to invest significantly in storage capacity. And that's going to be part of the program going forward. But even if you add on the cost of storage, the renewable energy is still going to be more cost competitive, both from an initial capital outlay as well as from an operating expenditure perspective.
You can't run a business unless your customers pay their debts. We've got the Soweto electricity bill. It's always brought up. I don't know where it's sitting at the moment, 15, 20 billion rand. If I don't pay my electricity bill, I get cut off. So I make an effort to make sure that I pay for my electricity. Municipalities, however, big municipal areas, you've got very, very tough on certain municipalities, and you've had some results there. But there's some big political hot potatoes. How do you ever get around those? Lots of questions that have come through saying, how do you tackle the issue of municipal debt?
It is a huge challenge. The municipalities now owe us in overdue debt in the order of 31.4 billion rand. Again, an extraordinary number that we need to address. And we have over the past number of months taken increasingly assertive steps. We've obtained court orders to attach movable assets. We've gone out to the Mfuleni municipality and we've attached office furniture and light delivery vehicles, bakkies, and those are held by the sheriff of the court until such time as the debt situation is addressed. The same with Maluti Apufong, where we attached a bank account of some 220 million rand. We've gone to Machabeng, which is Welkom, and we are now famously the holder of security over 139 farms. But that is what you do. If your customers don't pay you and you are prohibited by law, which we are interdicted from cutting off electricity entirely, then you've got other steps that you have to take in order to recover the debt.
And it's fine to own 139 farms. You've then got to, if you take over those farms, what you're going to do with them? Put solar on them or perhaps sell them at a market-related price. And that's all well and good, but it just adds another layer of complexity with which you should not have to deal. And it's more and more distraction in the process. We can get very depressed about Eskom, and we can go and slit our wrists and take a nice warm bath and make it all go away. I get a sense, though, that you have got a handle on Eskom like most, at least, of your last 10 predecessors probably didn't.
Well, I think the one thing that I do have to say is that Eskom keeps me very humble. As soon as you think you understand how the system works, something new crops up and a new revelation comes to your attention, or a unit fails that you'd thought was going to be reliable. So I would, by no stretch of the imagination, claim victory. It's far too early. We are conducting reliability maintenance that will see a step change in reliability of generation by April. And then by September of next year, we should see a significant reduction, note reduction, not elimination, in the risk of load shedding. But until we get additional generation capacity, the risk of load shedding will still be there.
And we can't grow an economy until we have surplus power. I mean, we've got to be operating, I think, what is the ideal measure, 80% of capacity, so that you can be taking plant down from time to time to do reliable maintenance. And we have not had that reliability for a decade, more.
Exactly. And that's exactly the reason why we need more capacity. And at the time when the philosophy of keeping the lights on at all costs prevailed, that is when midlife refurbishments were deferred. We didn't carry out the maintenance that we should have carried out. And the consequence is today that we are faced with a generation system that is fundamentally unreliable and unpredictable in spite of our best efforts to turn it around.
Lots of people would like to see some of your predecessors go to jail. I mean, are you assisting in the process of the criminal investigations into the mismanagement of Eskom over time?
Definitely, yes. We are collaborating with law enforcement authorities. We've, of course, got the Special Investigation Unit that we work with very, very closely. And we, as Eskom, don't have powers of arrest. We do have the power to go after people who have misappropriated funds from Eskom on a civil basis. We've, I think, achieved some notable successes from firms like McKinsey, Deloitte. We have announced that we are going after PwC, but we've also recently announced that we are going after the individuals involved. And these include some former executives of Eskom. There is former Minister Zwane, as well as, of course, the Gupta brothers. And pursuing these claims, and it's 3.8 billion rand just in this particular instance, legally is quite a challenge. But we're confident of our chances. Our lawyers advise us that we've got a strong case.
The United Arab Emirates, I don't think, is particularly that keen on assisting, though, and that's always a problem, isn't it? Where you've got multiple jurisdictions. Sure, you can claim the small change, perhaps, from the guys who were left behind as the Guptas packed their bags and went off on their next merry exploit. But do you ever really expect to get any joy out of the Guptas?
I don't think we're going to get back to 3.8 billion. That is aspirational. But there's also a principle at stake here. And I think it's important to drive home that principle, is that you are not allowed to steal money, to misappropriate funds, and get away with it. There have to be consequences to doing that. People have criticized me. They've said, oh, you know, all you're going to do is to enrich a bunch of lawyers. Of course, the lawyers are going to make money out of this. But if we don't do it, the message is clear. You can steal with impunity. And that is not a message that I think South Africa can afford.
Until fairly recently, I don't think too many of us had that much faith in the National Prosecuting Authority, the Special Investigations Unit, but something has changed. I mean, there's definitely a change of tone, there's definitely a change of temperature when it comes to law enforcement. Have you been impressed by the people you have dealt with in terms of assisting with the investigations, giving the information? Is there sufficient skill within the investigators to actually build cases?
The SIU has some very dedicated and committed employees. It's a very small outfit. They're probably under-resourced. And I'm sure that many of the other investigations are under-resourced. And therefore, I think if we are serious about tackling this, we should throw more resources at this problem in order to avoid this becoming a crime that is prosecuted 10 or 15 years after it was perpetrated. That surely cannot be the way in which we want to pursue criminal justice.
January will mark your 1 year as CEO of Eskom. Let's assume you can stick it out for 5 more. What would you want to have achieved by then?
So I'd like to see operational stability returned, so that we comprehensively see the back of load shedding. And again, to emphasize, that'll take repairing what we've got, as well as the addition of extra generation capacity. I'd like to see a much improved income statement, resolving the tariff disputes that we've got with NERSA. I'd like to see that we get our costs firmly under control. I'd like to see that we find a way of addressing our debt, sort out our structure, that we complete the legal separation of the 3 entities in Eskom. But then lastly, I'd like to build an organization that has a lot of human resilience, but also a high-performance culture that is ethical and that is compliant.
Is that realistic? I mean, it's a hell of a checklist. Can you really do that within 5 years, considering just how much damage has been wrought over quite an extended period of time?
It is a bit of a labor of Sisyphus, but what is the cost of not doing it? What is the cost of not trying? And that's how I'd like to think about it.
And dealing with government seems to have had a mindset change as well in terms of the way in which it treats entities like Eskom. You would have been on the outside of many of the discussions. You were on the manufacturing circle, for example. You understand how it has worked in the past. Has there been a fundamental shift there too?
Yeah, I must say that the narrative that's been out there of political interference in state-owned entities is not something that I've experienced. People have complained about Minister Gordhan in particular. I have found him to be very supportive. Of course, he holds me to account. Of course, he's disappointed when there's load shedding. But that, I think, is the case for every South African. Does he phone me from time to time to express his unhappiness about the fact that the lights are off? Of course he does. But I think that's his right and probably his obligation as well. But he has not once interfered from a political perspective in what we have tried to do at Eskom. So I've certainly found the political environment far less challenging to navigate than I had anticipated.
So no regrets then in taking on possibly the hardest job in South Africa. I mean, there are many, many hard jobs. The health minister's had a hell of a year. The president's had a hell of a year. You've taken over Eskom almost as we were going into lockdown. Perhaps that bought you some space. But no regrets in taking one of the hardest jobs in the country?
I think it's an amazing job. It's an amazing opportunity to try and make a difference. Dare I say it's energizing. I won't call it electrifying, but it is definitely exciting.
Do you think you might fail? Do you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning at a cold sweat thinking this actually might not work?
That does happen. That does happen. Look, I think you'd have to be incredibly arrogant to assume that I could walk in there and fix where others have failed before me. So I don't suffer from delusions of grandeur in this regard. This is a tough assignment, and it's not me. I keep on telling my Eskom colleagues, I can't fix Eskom, but we can fix Eskom. So it has to be a joint effort. It has to be a team effort if we want to turn the business around. And we need the support of South Africans as well. When we put out those electricity traffic lights on TV, we need your support, because you can make a contribution by not using electricity, by switching off your pool pump or your geyser. It really makes a difference. So we are where we are. It is a national crisis that we're facing with Eskom, and we need everybody to pitch in and try and make a difference.
But you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't think you had a better than even chance of making it work.
Sure. If I thought this was mission impossible, I wouldn't have done it. So I do think it is something that can be achieved. I think we're making good progress. Some of the actions that I would have liked to implement have taken significantly longer because of government procurement processes and approval processes and so forth. What we used to see in the private sector in terms of appointing contractors and people in a matter of weeks, that doesn't happen in the state sector. So that slows us down. But does it prevent us from eventually getting to where we want to be? No, it doesn't. So I remain resolute that this can be done.
André de Ruyter, Chief Executive at Eskom. Thank you very much indeed. Johannes, back to you.
Thank you both, Bruce and André, for those realistic views. I'm sure we all agree that taking on the role as CEO of Eskom is no mean feat. And with all the trials and tribulations that André will continue to face, such as tariff increases, debt collection, and load shedding that you referred to, I can think of no better person to lead Eskom back to the days when it was the world's leading power generating utility. We wish you well, André, on what is no doubt an incredibly challenging journey. And it is good to know that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. For those of you who's already PSG clients, we thank you for your current support, and we look forward to your continued support. For those who are not clients, we welcome this opportunity to introduce you to some of our financial advisors, either in the wealth space or in the insurance division. Our advisors are incredibly well equipped to analyze your financial needs and advise you across your wealth as well as your insurance portfolios. Please get in touch with us via this event's registration platform. We welcome your feedback, so please continue to communicate with us. And remember, all the past webinars are also still available for you to view. Look out for our next speaker, Tracy Davies, in this Think Big series. She will be talking about the future of environmental, social, and governance factors. And on that note, stay healthy and stay safe.